Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch this brief video providing an overview of the housing chapter for the 2026 update to the Massachusetts Rural Policy Plan. In this video, we will review the context regarding rural housing challenges, recent progress made, and review the draft recommendations in the plan. Your watching this video now will allow us to have meaningful discussion during our public engagement meetings for the housing chapter. When we meet via Zoom to hear your feedback, some of the primary questions we will have for attendees are: does the summary of this chapter's challenges, successes, and achievements feel right and representative of your community? Which of the recommendations would make the biggest difference in your community? And what is missing? The Rural Policy Advisory Commission's goal within the housing chapter of the Rural Policy Plan is to expand and preserve safe, affordable homes in rural Massachusetts by tailoring state tools to rural markets, strengthening local and regional capacity, and enabling every rural community to support the Commonwealth's Home for Everyone vision. Massachusetts faces a statewide housing shortfall and affordability crisis, and rural communities are fully a part of that story, even though their numbers are smaller in absolute terms. Rural regions in western and central Massachusetts have some of the lowest wages, lowest vacancy rates, and highest renter cost burden in the state, while also shouldering aging housing stocks and limited local revenues. Rural communities surrounding Boston and on the Cape and Islands struggle to provide affordable and workforce housing in an inflated housing market. Investment in both new and existing housing is vital in rural towns, where there is a deep mismatch between current housing stock and current needs. Older homes, changing household sizes, an aging population, and the pressure of second homes and short-term rentals all contribute to a shortage of affordable units for current residents, and for the new households rural regions must attract to remain viable. All types of housing are needed in rural markets, including the development and rehabilitation of housing that creates homes for elders to age in place, workforce housing, and multi-generational housing that supports children, parents, and grandparents in complex living situations. In market-constrained rural communities, rents and sale prices are too high for many local workers, yet still too low to cover the full cost of development, especially once the price of wells, septic systems, roads, parking, and stormwater infrastructure is included, leaving projects with large unrecoverable gaps. At the same time, rural communities offer relatively lower land costs, strong social networks, and a high quality of life that could attract mission-driven and small-scale developers if state programs lowered risk and improved deal feasibility. These financial realities are compounded by structural and regulatory barriers. Most rural communities lack full public water and sewer coverage, and many have none at all, which sharply constrains where multifamily or denser home ownership development can occur, and increases per unit costs, even for small projects or accessory dwelling units. Rehabilitation of existing underutilized and vacant properties, which could result in new units coming online relatively quickly, is often economically infeasible because low assessed values more quickly trigger expensive state building code rehabilitation upgrade requirements and septic standards that require full and expensive upgrades for modest improvements in communities where incomes and property values are far below state averages. Rural municipalities also operate with limited administrative capacity and narrow fiscal bases. Many rural towns rely overwhelmingly on residential property taxes, have very low equalized property values, are close to or effectively at their Proposition 2.5 levy limits, and have few or no planning or housing staff, making it difficult to assemble and manage complex housing deals or to meet evolving state best practice benchmarks, such as the fact that housing production plans are only valid for 5 years, despite limited growth and change in most rural communities. At the same time, many of the Commonwealth's newer housing tools and incentives, from transit-oriented and gateway city-oriented programs to housing choice and infrastructure initiatives, are designed around stronger markets, higher growth, or MBTA service areas, which means rural market-constrained communities often do not qualify, cannot compete, or lack the match and capacity needed to benefit. A recent success, thanks to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, is the release of the Rural and Small Town Housing Choice Program that acknowledges that many rural municipalities have less capacity and depressed development markets despite municipal commitment to create favorable conditions for housing development. The communities on this map in green are the recently designated Rural and Small Town Housing Choice communities. While the changes to required best practices are very welcome, eligibility to this program is still predicated on the production of a certain percentage of housing units. The statewide housing plan, A Home for Everyone, and the Massachusetts Housing Need Assessment call for increased production, preservation, stability, and equity across all regions. Rural Massachusetts must be equipped to participate in and benefit from that agenda. For rural areas, that means addressing distinct barriers in each of these domains. Making production financially feasible at small scales in weak markets and affordable in stronger markets, including seasonal and vacation markets. Preserving and rehabilitating existing housing stock. Preventing displacement and instability among low-income renters and homeowners. And aligning climate, infrastructure, and code reforms with rural conditions, rather than inadvertently making development and rehab even harder. The following recommendations are high level. Many of the recommendations in each chapter of the plan include sub-recommendations that speak to specific strategies and tactics regarding how the high-level recommendation could be implemented. We strongly encourage you to review the PDF of the full recommendations for this chapter at the same URL through which you accessed this video. The URL is also cited at the top of these slides. Recommendation 1. Create rural appropriate capital tools, set-asides, and programs that acknowledge the challenges of building housing in rural, market-constrained towns and the increased cost of small-scale developments in areas without infrastructure. 2. Expand toolkit and funding mechanisms for seasonal communities that acknowledge the challenges of building and preserving year-round housing in rural areas where extremely high market prices are driven by the seasonal, vacation, and luxury market. 3. Fund rural housing development capacity. 4. Through the Office of Rural Policy, analyze all housing development funding programs offered by the state to assess rural eligibility and if and how they restrict and/or encourage housing production in rural markets, including very small developments. 5. Make rehabilitation of existing housing financially and administratively feasible. And 6. Make adaptive reuse of existing structures financially and administratively feasible. Those are the high-level recommendations for this chapter. Again, when we meet for our feedback session, what we hope to learn from you is, does the summary of this chapter's challenges, successes, and achievements feel right and representative of your community? Which of the recommendations would make the biggest difference in your community, and what's missing? Thanks again for taking the time to review this chapter, and we look forward to speaking with you live soon. In the interim, if you have questions or concerns, please direct them to Mark Maloney, Communications Manager with the Franklin Regional Council of Governments. Thanks again. Take care.